Well, hello, everybody. Welcome to Assignment 9 for U.S. History about the women's suffrage movement. So, our aim today is, did the 19th Amendment successfully give suffrage or voting rights to all women? Why or why not? So I'm going to do a little mini lesson now, and then I'll have a different video with a read aloud for the actual assignment and article. Okay, so just a little background information. The women's suffrage movement was a movement that took place from the 1840s till about 1920. And this was a reform movement during the same time as the Industrial Revolution to give voting rights to women. Okay, their goals were to give women the right to vote and to give them more power in politics and in Congress, right? And it's called the women's suffrage movement because suffrage is a word that means voting rights. Okay, so let's talk about the historical context or the background info. What led to the suffrage movement? Well, in the 1800s, women did not have a bunch of rights. They didn't have the right to vote. They didn't have the right to own property without the approval of a man, like a husband or a father or something. They didn't have equal paying jobs. They weren't allowed to have a lot of jobs. And so in 1848, there was this big meeting called the Seneca Falls Convention. And it was the first meeting of the women's suffrage movement. And a bunch of women got together, and even actually some Black men who were trying to end slavery, they came to this meeting too, to set goals and strategies for how to gain the right to vote. Right? Because Black men actually were trying to fight for the right to vote at this time too. Okay, but the meeting focused on women. Now, a little bit after that, in 1865, the 15th Amendment passed. Okay, and we remember the 15th Amendment gave Black men the right to vote, but no women got the right to vote. So in 1865, Black men technically had the right to vote, but no women. Some white women, in response to the 15th Amendment, were actually pissed. They were very angry that they did not get their voting rights first, right? Now, some Black women were like, okay, this is a good sign. Maybe if they give Black men the right to vote, we can get the right to vote too. But, not everyone agreed. So from 1848 until about 1920, women got together in different groups and they protested, they raised money, they led marches, and they even did something called hunger strikes to demand the right to vote, which is where you sit somewhere public with like a sign that says what you're doing, right, in a hunger strike, and you sit like in front of the White House, for example, and you refuse to eat until the president or Congress gives women the right to vote. A lot of women did that. They starved themselves to try to get attention and convince people to give them the right to vote. Now, the outcomes of the women's suffrage movement in 1920, the 19th Amendment passed. And the 19th Amendment gave women the right to vote. It said you can't stop someone from voting based on their gender. Okay? And that's all great. Except Black women, even after the 19th Amendment, still had issues trying to vote. They were often blocked from voting because of white violence, so groups like the KKK and others who threatened them if they tried to go vote. Many states passed laws that required literacy tests, which were really difficult tests that only Black people had to take in order to register to vote. And also they had to pay poll taxes, which were fees that only Black people had to pay in order to vote. And still even I didn't put this in the notes, but still other minorities weren't even allowed to vote still. Like, for example, Native American women and Asian women were not given the right to citizenship and to voting. And often if you were Hispanic, but you were sort of darker skinned, you were lumped in the category of Black. So you had to do these things as well. Now, in a lot of history books, they talk about famous suffragists or women who fought for voting rights. Some of the most well-known ones are Susan B. Anthony, who is a white woman who fought for voting rights for women, and Elizabeth Cady Stanton, another white woman. But also some Black women who fought for these rights that are less talked about are Ida B. Wells, her picture is over here in the document, and Sojourner Truth, who is another famous Black suffragist or suffragette. And she wrote a famous speech called Ain't I a Woman? It's all about giving Black women voting rights. Okay? So this assignment is all about sort of the struggles that women of color faced in the movement to get voting rights. Okay, so if you want a read through of the assignment, it's basically, I'll do that in another video, but it's basically an article where you read and you answer the questions on the right here based on what you read and the question at the end. Okay, make sure you put it in your own words, and good luck.